At 6 feet 2 inches and 215 pounds, Scott Stevens wasn't the biggest defenseman in NHL history, but he was undoubtedly one of the most feared. More than his 3 Stanley Cup championships, 13 All-Star selections, and 22 seasons of dominance, Stevens redefined the role of a defenseman and a team captain. He changed the way defensemen approached open ice hits and made players think twice before skating with their heads down. Captain Crunch became a nightmare for opposing players. Though not a high-scoring defenseman, Stevens' old-school toughness, sometimes crossing the line, was on full display in the 2000 playoffs, where he delivered one of the most game-changing performances in NHL history. His devastating, yet clean hit on Eric Lindros became a defining moment of his legacy and showed why players would rather face a brick wall than Stevens in his prime. If you appreciate these stories, hit that subscribe button. Each video takes over 50 hours of research, writing, and editing. One person pouring their heart into bringing hockey's greatest legends to life. Your support keeps these stories coming. In this video, we'll dive into Stevens' prime years with the New Jersey Devils, how the franchise, once dismissed as a laughingstock, became a defensive powerhouse under his leadership, winning 3 Stanley Cups in 9 years. We'll explore how his bone-crushing hits during crucial playoff moments shattered the spirits of star players like Lindros, Kariya, and Kozlov. It all began in 1982, when an 18-year-old Stevens first laced up his skates for the Washington Capitals. The Devils had been struggling since moving to New Jersey from Colorado in 1982. In their first decade, they made the playoffs just 3 times and were the joke of the NHL. The low point came in 1983 when Wayne Gretzky called them a Mickey Mouse organization after his Oilers destroyed them 13-4. The team was so bad that fans wore paper bags over their heads at games. They cycled through 6 different coaches in their first 5 seasons and couldn't keep any star players. But after finishing with just 28 wins in the 1991 season, everything changed because of a shocking decision by an arbitrator. When the St. Louis Blues signed Brendan Shanahan from the Devils in 1991, they needed to send compensation to New Jersey. Usually, teams would negotiate this deal, but they couldn't agree. The case went to an arbitrator who stunned the hockey world by awarding Scott Stevens to the Devils as compensation. The Blues were furious. They had just signed Stevens to a massive contract the year before, making him the highest-paid defenseman in the NHL. Stevens himself was so angry he refused to report to New Jersey for 3 weeks. He even threatened to retire at age 27 rather than join the lowly Devils. But when he finally showed up, he didn't know he was about to transform a laughingstock into a dynasty. The 1982 draft was loaded with talent, producing Hall of Famers like Phil Housley and Doug Gilmour. The Washington Capitals chose Stevens 5th overall despite some scouts questioning his size and offensive upside. But the Capitals knew exactly what they were getting, the hardest hitter in junior hockey. In his debut game, he knocked down 2 Philadelphia Flyers players so hard their teammates looked at each other in disbelief. Even as a 19-year-old rookie, Stevens put fear in grown men's hearts because nobody could survive his open ice hits. Veterans with 10+ years in the league would keep their heads on a swivel when number 3 was on the ice. Stevens hit like a wrecking ball, square, clean, and with perfect timing. He didn't target heads or launch himself. He simply drove through opponents' chests with his shoulder, catching them admiring their passes. Despite not being the biggest defender, Stevens had tree trunk legs, a low center of gravity, and a mean streak. If you tried to retaliate after a hit, he'd drop his gloves faster than you could blink. In just his 3rd game, Stevens fought NHL tough guy Bane Wilson and held his own. Capitals coach Brian Murray couldn't believe what he was seeing. Most rookies, especially defensemen, need time to adjust to NHL physicality. Stevens was imposing it on day 1. By his 2nd month in the league, opposing coaches were warning their star players to stay away from his side of the ice. His defensive positioning was already perfect. He rarely chased hits and never got caught out of position. In his rookie season, Stevens played 77 games and racked up 25 points and 195 penalty minutes, the 4th highest for a rookie defenseman at that time. But the standard stats didn't tell the full story of his impact. The Capitals improved from 26 wins the previous season to 39 wins with Stevens on the blue line. His plus-minus of +12 was remarkable on a team that had been terrible defensively before his arrival. He averaged nearly 22 minutes per game, unheard of for a rookie defenseman in that era, when veterans typically got the heavy minutes. The most eye-popping moment of his rookie campaign came against the Montreal Canadiens when he flattened future Hall of Famer Guy Lafleur with a hit so clean and devastating that the Montreal crowd known for booing big hits on their players, actually gasped in collective shock. After the game, Lafleur admitted, "I didn't see him coming. Suddenly I was looking at the ceiling. I'll know better next time." Stevens had a 5-fight night against the Hartford Whalers, something almost impossible to imagine today. When the Whalers tried to intimidate the rookie, he fought their tough guy Torrey Robertson twice in the same period. By season's end, he had established himself as the rare defenseman who could hit, fight, and play solid defense. His early weakness showed in the offensive zone, where he wasn't quite the playmaker the Capitals had hoped for. His first pass was sometimes shaky, and he struggled with patience on the power play. Stevens also took too many unnecessary penalties, sometimes letting his aggressive nature pull him out of position. "He needs to harness that fire," Coach Brian Murray said. "Right now he's like a wild stallion out there." But what impressed teammates most was his fearlessness against established stars. When Wayne Gretzky and the dominant Oilers came to town, Stevens didn't back down 1 inch. He hammered Gretzky's line mate Jari Kurri with a hit that Edmonton players were still talking about years later. Mark Messier, one of hockey's toughest players, tried to intimidate the rookie by challenging him. Stevens simply nodded, dropped his gloves, and fought the Oilers enforcer to a draw, earning respect from the defending Stanley Cup champions. When Stevens arrived in New Jersey, he met the man who would transform his career, head coach Jacques Lemaire. As a player, Lemaire had won 8 Stanley Cups with the Montreal Canadiens and was known for his brilliant defensive mind. As a coach, he was a strict disciplinarian who believed in perfect defensive positioning and team-first play. When he first watched Stevens practice, Lemaire saw a wild, aggressive defenseman who could deliver bone-crushing hits, but often left his position to do so. "Scott was like a missile looking for targets," Lemaire recalled. "I wanted him to be a guided missile." Stevens was used to having freedom on the ice, while Lemaire wanted structured play. In an early season game, Stevens abandoned his position to throw a big hit, leading to a goal against. Lemaire benched him for nearly a full period. When Stevens protested, Lemaire didn't back down. "You want to hit guys? Hit them when it doesn't hurt the team." The clash continued for months. Stevens thought Lemaire was trying to change his identity. "I hit people. That's my game," Stevens argued in a heated locker room exchange. Lemaire fired back. "Your game should be winning." Teammates watched nervously as their captain and coach butted heads. But something clicked in Stevens around mid-season. He began to see how Lemaire's system could actually showcase his strengths. Lemaire taught Stevens patience, to wait for the perfect moment when a hit would both punish an opponent and create a turnover. Instead of chasing hits all over the ice, Stevens learned to patrol the blue line like a predator waiting for prey. "Before Jacques, I'd look for hits," Stevens admitted years later. "After his coaching, I made opponents come to me." The transformation was remarkable. Stevens' hit count actually decreased, but his defensive impact soared. He went from being a feared hitter to becoming the cornerstone of the most suffocating defensive system in NHL history. Lemaire had turned Stevens from a weapon into a complete defenseman, and this new version of Scott Stevens would soon terrorize the league in ways nobody had seen before. Stevens' evolution under Lemaire's system showed in the numbers. His penalty minutes dropped from 124 in his first Devil season to just 88 2 years later, while his plus-minus improved from +8 to an outstanding +53. He still delivered crushing hits, but now they created turnovers instead of taking him out of position. The team's goals against dropped dramatically, from 259 before Stevens fully bought into the system to just 220 a year later. "I used to think defense was about big hits and intimidation," Stevens said. "Now I understand it's about position, angles, and patience." His stick work improved dramatically. He led the team with 196 stick checks that resulted in possession changes during the 1993-94 season. Former teammate Ken Daneyko noticed the change. Early Scott would chase a hit from the blue line to the boards. New Scott would wait at the blue line, knowing you'd have to come to him eventually. With Stevens anchoring the defense, the Devils improved from 87 points to 106 points in just 2 seasons. Teams started changing their offensive strategies against New Jersey, often avoiding Stevens' side of the ice entirely. Opposing coaches would warn players before games, "Keep your head up through the neutral zone, or number 4 will put you in the hospital." Stevens wasn't just better, he was becoming the defensive cornerstone that would soon make the Devils a dynasty. In the 1994 playoffs, Stevens showed he was built for postseason hockey. Against the Bruins, he shut down Cam Neely completely, holding the star power forward to 0 goals in the series. His hit on Neely in Game 3 was so devastating that Boston fans threw debris on the ice. However, in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Rangers, Stevens and the Devils fell just short. losing in double overtime of Game 7 when Stéphane Matteau scored the heartbreaking goal. That loss fueled Stevens. In the 1995 playoffs, he elevated to another level, playing over 30 minutes per game and finishing with an incredible +17 rating in 20 playoff games. His defining moment came against Philadelphia when he flattened Eric Lindros with a hit so thunderous the whole arena went silent. The Devils swept the heavily favored Red Wings in the finals, with Stevens winning the Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP despite scoring only 2 points. He's not just a hitter anymore, Detroit's Steve Yzerman said after the finals. He's the best shutdown defenseman I've ever faced. Around the league, players started to fear Stevens in a different way. Before games, opposing stars would actually ask teammates which side Stevens played on so they could avoid him. After winning the 1995 Stanley Cup, Stevens faced the biggest challenge of his career, a growing criticism that his style of play was too violent. During the 1996-97 season, Stevens delivered a crushing hit on Slava Kozlov that left the Red Wings forward concussed. NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman publicly questioned whether Stevens' hits were good for the game. Sports columnists labeled him a headhunter and the NHL's most dangerous player. Even some former players called for rule changes specifically targeting Stevens' style. The criticism stung Stevens deeply. "I've never tried to hurt anyone," he said in a rare emotional interview. "I play hard, but I play clean." In a game against Buffalo, Stevens was ejected for a hit that would have been routine in previous seasons. When he protested to the referee, he was told, "We've been instructed to watch you specifically." Stevens found himself at a crossroads. His identity as a player was under attack. During team meetings, he argued with coaches about adjusting his approach. "If I can't hit, what am I supposed to do out there?" His frustration spilled over in a team meeting when he snapped at a younger teammate who suggested he tone down his hitting style. Head coach Larry Robinson pulled Stevens aside after practice and told him bluntly, "Adapt or become obsolete." The crisis deepened when NHL officials showed Stevens a compilation video of his hits, highlighting moments they deemed excessive. Stevens was furious, but also shaken. That night, he called former teammate Ken Daneyko and asked, "Am I really the dirty player they're making me out to be?" This moment of self-doubt forced Stevens to reconsider his approach to the game. Stevens returned to training camp with a new mindset. He had studied hours of video to refine his hitting technique, focusing on timing rather than impact. He lowered his target area to the chest instead of the shoulder, which made his hits cleaner but still effective. Stevens also worked with the team's strength coach to add more muscle to his lower body, reporting to camp at 220 pounds, his heaviest playing weight ever. The results were immediate. His penalty minutes dropped to a career-low 46 while maintaining his intimidation factor. "I'm still hitting guys, just smarter," Stevens told reporters. The team noticed too. The Devils allowed 28 fewer goals that season. Most importantly, Stevens silenced critics when league officials used videos of his new hitting style as examples of clean, hard hockey in player safety meetings. His transformation proved that even late in his career, Stevens could adapt without sacrificing what made him special. The transformed Stevens led the Devils to 2 more Stanley Cups in 2000 and 2003. His leadership was legendary. He never gave speeches, but led through actions. During the 2000 Cup run, Stevens played with a separated shoulder that was so painful, teammates could hear him grinding his teeth on the bench. He still logged 30-plus minutes in elimination games. Despite never scoring more than 5 goals in a season with New Jersey, he was named to the NHL First All-Star Team twice. Most impressively, the Devils allowed the fewest goals in the NHL 5 times with Stevens as captain, a record that may never be broken. The 2000 Eastern Conference Finals against the Flyers was Stevens' masterpiece. In Game 1, the Devils lost badly, and Stevens was on the ice for 3 goals against. He called a players-only meeting that night, saying just 4 words, "Follow me next game." In Game 2, he delivered the series-changing hit on Lindros that silenced the Philadelphia crowd. The sound of the collision echoed throughout the arena, and Lindros lay motionless on the ice for nearly a minute. Stevens simply skated to the bench without celebration. In Game 3, Stevens blocked 7 shots and played 32 minutes despite a bleeding cut above his eye. For Game 4, the Flyers tried avoiding Stevens completely, but he adjusted by intercepting 5 neutral zone passes. In the deciding Game 7, with the score tied 1-1, Stevens made a crucial defensive play, diving to break up a 2-on-1 that would have given Philadelphia the lead. Minutes later, the Devils scored and advanced to the finals, Flyers coach Craig Ramsay admitted afterward, "Stevens broke our spirit. He took our heart." In the 2003 Stanley Cup Finals against Anaheim, Stevens faced his ultimate test, shutting down superstar Paul Kariya. The series was tied 2-2, and Kariya had been Anaheim's best player. Early in Game 6, Stevens caught Kariya with a shoulder to the chest that knocked him unconscious. Fans watched in horror as Kariya lay motionless on the ice. The hit was so devastating that commentator Gary Thorne declared, "Kariya is not getting up." The Devils won the series in 7 games, with Stevens shadowing Kariya every shift in the deciding game. Kariya, still feeling effects from the hit, was held pointless. Years later, when asked about the hit, Stevens remained unapologetic. "That's hockey." He came across the middle with his head down. "I'd do it again." Yes, Scott Stevens never scored more than 78 points in a season. Yes, his hitting style would likely result in multiple suspensions in today's NHL. And sure, he wasn't flashy or marketable like other stars of his era, but what made Stevens special was his singular impact on the game through sheer intimidation and leadership. Players would literally change their skating paths to avoid his side of the ice. Trainers kept smelling salts ready when their team faced the Devils. The ultimate measure of his legacy, the Devils retired his number 4, installed a statue outside their arena, and the team never really replaced what he brought. Hockey historian Bob McKenzie put it best: "The NHL changed rules twice specifically because of Stevens' hitting. You don't change rules for ordinary players." While critics called him a headhunter, teammates saw something different. A player who showed up early, left late, and was willing to play through injuries that would sideline most players for weeks. That's why Stevens wasn't just respected. He was feared and revered in equal measure. Thanks for watching NHL Hero. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Scott Stevens' bone-crushing career, smash that like button and subscribe for more hockey legends. Check out our video on Nicklas Lidstrom next to see how the perfect defenseman contrasted with Stevens' intimidating style. Hockey's greatest stories are just a click away.